are listed there, but the big ones are English, Afrikaans, isiZulu, and Sotho. I speak Northern Sotho, Sepedi, because that's what they speak in my village. Yeah, but there's lots and lots of languages. And the national anthem is actually sung in 5 different languages. So they had us learn it phonetically during our training. I don't really know actually what it means, but I can sing it. So it's great. And it's known as the Rainbow Nation because it's just like a spectacularly diverse place. There's just people from every race, every color, every country in South Africa. It's a pretty amazing place. And so the flag is on the bottom left there. It was agreed to after the end of apartheid in 1954. I don't know what all the colors represent, otherwise I would tell you. The national animal is the springbok, which is that funky looking deer. And yeah, their cricket team is called the Springboks, there you go. And then the national crest is on the top right. And then the bottom right is the king protea, which is the national flower. All right, so these are some pictures from Pretoria, which is the capital. Up in the right there, that's a big old statue of Nelson Mandela, which is just huge. Like you can see us in front of it there in the bottom right. And then that's like a view of the city. So that's where I go, that's where the Peace Corps headquarters is. So I'm there most, like if I'm in a city, it's probably this one. And then Johannesburg is very close to Pretoria, and it's like the biggest major city. That's where the airport is. So that's a panoramic view, and then that is a picture taken by my mother in the arts district called Maboneng, and it's my favorite place. And so you can think of Johannesburg and Pretoria a little bit like Minneapolis and St. Paul. Like Minneapolis is kind of bigger and more fun to be in, and that's Johannesburg. And then St. Paul is the capital and where you actually have to be to do anything official, and that's Pretoria. All right, and then Cape Town, the most beautiful place in the world, I think. It is centered around Table Mountain, and then it has ocean just all around it. It's kind of on a little bump. So there are penguins there, there are seals, there are whales, and we saw all 3 on our trip there. And then the picture in the bottom right there is of a neighborhood called Bo-Kaap, which is a traditionally Muslim neighborhood in the middle of Cape Town. So there you go. And then the top right picture there is of the Botanical Gardens in Cape Town. And then Durban is on the east coast of South Africa, and it's kind of the beach town. A lot of schools go there for school trips to swim and be in the ocean. It's very fun. I went there for Christmas last year, so this is a little bit different. Yeah, that top right picture, that was where I was like a year ago today. Yeah, so that's Durban. All right, and so I want to talk a little bit about South African culture, but the problem is that 11 official languages means at least 11 different cultures, if not more. So there's really no such thing as South African culture. But one kind of unifying factor in South African culture is what we call Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. So in the States, we tend to be very individual-centered. You do the things that are best for you most of the time, consciously or unconsciously. But in South Africa, people tend to be much more communally focused. For like just a small, tiny example, we were told during training, if you buy food and bring it into your house, it is not your food anymore. Like, they will be very offended if you just keep it in your room or something, because food is not mine, food is not yours, like, it's everyone in the house. So, apartheid, which some of you are probably familiar with the fact that this happened, it started a long, long time ago, and it only officially ended in 1994 with South Africa's first democratic elections, and we're still, that's only 23, 24 years ago, so that we're still seeing the after effects today. So apartheid arbitrarily separated people into 4 racial categories: white, colored, black, and Indian, and if you didn't fit into one of those categories, they just put you in one. So for example, Chinese people in South Africa were classified as black, but Japanese people in South Africa were classified as white. So it was just very arbitrary. And what category you were put into determined where you could live, it determined what schools you could go to, it determined what jobs you could have, it determined everything about your life, it determined who you could marry. So if you're familiar with Trevor Noah, his book Born a Crime is based on that fact because his mother was a black South African and his father was white. And so he was born illegally because he was born during apartheid. And apartheid also relegated most black South Africans to the homelands, which were these arbitrarily assigned, like all the Sepedi people go here, all the Zulu people go here, all the Xhosa people go here. And that had a lot of reasons for it. Partially, white South Africans just wanted to take all the land. Partially, they wanted to separate black South Africans into tribes so that they would be less likely to band together and fight back. Yeah, and we still see that today, because like the village where I live is in a form of homeland, and there are no resources, like the farmland is very arid and dry, and yeah, a lot of things are still happening. And then the ones who didn't get put in homelands, they moved to townships outside of major cities, because they still wanted black South Africans to work for them and do like their cooking and their cleaning. So they put them in townships that had like bullet trains or buses coming into the cities every day. Because they weren't allowed to live in the cities, but they needed them to be close enough to work. So, and we still see that today, because a lot of times, like in Joburg and Pretoria, the wealthy areas are mostly white South Africans, and the townships are pretty much all black South Africans. Yeah, and it also required black South Africans to carry passbooks, which were like little ID cards, and it had to say where you were living, who your family was, what your job was, and if it wasn't fully updated, you could be arrested and put in jail for up to like 2 years. And they were almost impossible to update because the offices are a little bit like our DMV. Like, they're only open during work hours, the lines are hours and hours long, and even then, they might not speak the same language as you because 11 official languages. Yeah. And then during apartheid also, it was under Bantu education, which meant that most black South African students were in separate schools, and there were a lot of economic disparities. For example, black South African children had to pay school fees even if they had no money, which meant a lot of kids weren't able to go to school at all. They also had to pay for their books, they had to pay for food. Afrikaans was the language of instruction at the time, which means that a lot of older South Africans don't speak English, they speak Afrikaans, and their home language like Sepedi or Xhosa. And then corporal punishment was also a huge thing in these schools, and that is also still, the effects of that are still around today, because the teachers who are teaching now were taught under this system. So they don't really know any other way other than this way. So yeah, so the current education system is standardized for the whole country. It's called CAPS, and it's changed quite a few times since 1994, but this is what it is right now. So students learn in their home language, like Sepedi or Xhosa, from grades R, which is kindergarten, until grade 3. And then they switch completely to English in grade 4. So up until that time, they have like a couple hours of English a week, and then they're suddenly learning all of their subjects in English, which, as you might imagine, is not an easy transition. A lot of my kids don't make that transition at all, and then they fall super far behind really quick. So by the time you get to the kids that I teach, which are grades 5, 6, and 7, some kids are excelling, like they can speak in English, they can read, they can write, and some kids maybe know how to say hello. And they're supposed to be learning history and science and all of those subjects in English, and they can't, so they just fall behind. Yeah, so the school where I work, I'm not going to say like the specific name because Peace Corps doesn't want me to, but it's a primary school in rural Sekhukhune district, Limpopo, and so it's close to Pretoria, maybe like a 3-hour drive away. And I have at my school 140 learners from 2 different villages. My village is only about 350 people, so we get learners from both villages. It's grades kindergarten through 7, so 8 different grades. But the Department of Education only allows us 4 teachers for 8 grades. So we also have 4 volunteer teachers, including me. And then the language of my village and my school is Sepedi. So the kids learn in Sepedi from grade R to 3, and then they switch to English in grade 4. And they continue to have a Sepedi class up until they graduate. So a little bit about the Peace Corps. It was established by John F. Kennedy in 1961. It has 6 sectors, which are education, health, youth development, community economic development, agriculture, and environment. And I'm an education volunteer, and I think about 40% of Peace Corps volunteers are education, so it's definitely the biggest one. So over the course of its history, more than 230,000 Americans have served in the Peace Corps, and currently, as of when this number happened, I don't know when it was, but 7,376 volunteers and trainees are abroad right now. So right now it operates in 65 countries, a lot of which are on the African continent, but also in South America, in Eastern Europe, in Asia, And 141 countries have been served total. And one thing I really like about Peace Corps and what it really has a lot of focus on is that Peace Corps only goes where it's explicitly invited to go. So the South Africa Peace Corps program started after the end of apartheid in 1994 because they made a deal, I believe it would have been Bill Clinton at the time. Bill Clinton and Nelson Mandela made a deal to send Peace Corps volunteers starting in 1994. And then, even after we're in South Africa, we only go to schools that explicitly invite us and say, we want a Peace Corps volunteer. So schools apply to the Department of Education, the Department of Education recommends schools to Peace Corps, and then Peace Corps decides where volunteers go. So I had no say in that. So I got really lucky because I love my school. So my life, when I left in July of 2017, and I had about 2.5 months of training. So during that time, I was learning Sepedi. I did a teaching practicum, which I had never taught in a classroom setting before, so that was really valuable for me. And we learned a lot about health and safety, like we have to ride in these big old minibuses we call taxis, and they had to tell us how to actually do that. And just other things like that, like don't drink the tap water. And then we also lived inside the like a host family's home, which was really so nice. And those families totally volunteered. Like Peace Corps, the only payment they got from Peace Corps was a bag of food every month so that they could feed us. And I loved them, they were fantastic humans. And at that point we were all living in the same large village so that we could all conglomerate and go to training every day. And then right now, I'm in my 2 years of service. So my 2 years of service will end next September. And so I've been teaching English, I've been doing secondary projects, and community integration, and I'll go more into each of those things. So teaching, I already mentioned I teach grades 5, 6, and 7. So I do English with all of those grades, and then I do life orientation with grade 7, which it basically means it's health class, it's PE class, it's civics class, some study skills, some job skills, it's got it all. It's a pretty fun class, I really enjoy it. And then I also do grade 7 creative arts, which, if you know me, that's like my ideal. So I teach visual arts and drama for that one. So this is me with my staff. We're all wearing very cute matching outfits in this picture. Yeah, so these are, most of those are actually teachers at my school. There's one who's not, but there's also one male on staff, but he doesn't really hang out with us. But yeah, so these are the fantastic South African teachers I work with. And my principal is the one kind of making a funny face. She was talking in all of these photos. Yeah, and this is a picture of my school. It's a bit of an old picture. It's not quite that under construction anymore. But The teacher's office is on the left, and then the classroom blocks are the one on the right, and then you can see in the back of the picture. We have 3 classrooms that are actually available for use right now. 3 are under construction, and then we have grade 7 in the teacher's boardroom because there's a lot of grades, so they need somewhere to go. And then, if you're familiar with my library project, I'm going to talk about it more later, but the library is going to be in the classroom on the far left of that back classroom building. So those are my grade 7 learners. They're adorable, and I love them. This was at Valentine's Day. I had them make posters saying like their goals and how they could love other people more, and yeah, and then they took a picture and they were very excited. Cuties. All right, I have some videos, but they don't work in the PowerPoint, so get excited. Sorry. All right. So work in 5 seconds, go. Yeah, so every morning they do this. They get together pretty much every morning before school, and they sing songs and they dance around. And that's my principal up at the front there, directing. And you can kind of see they line up by age, so the back is mostly grade 7 and the front is the little ones. And the preschool is actually on the grounds of the school, so they also come in and do this with us. They're very, very cute. All right, so secondary projects basically means anything that I do that's not teaching English, because my program, its main focus is teaching English, but they encourage us to do other projects with the school based on what the school wants and needs. So my main 4 are the Impule Maso Library, which I'll talk about, grassroots soccer, girls camps, and remedial classes. Oops. All right, so my library project I'm very excited about because we just got funded. So if you donated to that, thank you so much because I'm very excited about it. So this is it used to be an old teacher's office, but they built us a new building for that. So this is going to become our library. So the bookshelves will go on the right, and then that storeroom on the left will be where the computers are so that we don't have to worry about them being stolen because it's a strong room. And then in the back there will be some tables so that we can have remedial classes where kids can just come and sit and read. And I'm very excited because there are no libraries. Like, I was just thinking about how many libraries I had access to as a kid. I had so many libraries around, and it was so great. And these kids literally have no books. They don't have any books, they don't have any libraries. I think there might be a library an hour away by bus, but I've never been there, and I wouldn't know how to get there. Yeah, so I'm just excited that the kids are going to have an opportunity to read, because I asked 2 of my top students in grade 7, like, what is your favorite book? And both of them told me a book that we had read in class, which is very sweet of them, but it just means they haven't read any other books. So that is part of the Impule Maso Library Committee. Part of Peace Corps' focus is that Peace Corps volunteers never do anything alone, because if we try to start a project and no one in the community is invested, then it's just going to stop after we leave. I'm only there until the end of September. So with the library, I was really careful to get like a team of people who are excited about the library, and these people are awesome. And this is a picture this is on a holiday. They came on a holiday to come and sort books for 5 hours. And this is when we had finished and we're eating cake, which is great. This is a picture from grassroots soccer. That's my counterpart, the guy who helps me teach. So grassroots soccer is a program that uses like soccer as a game and soccer terms and all that good stuff to teach about HIV and AIDS, to teach about safe sex, and to teach about like how to remain safe, basically in general. So for example, like one game is called HIV Attacks. So one kid plays a human, and then one kid plays their immune system, and then all the other kids stand around them in a big circle and try to throw a ball at the human's legs. And if the ball hits the human's legs, then that represents them getting sick. So it's the immune system's job to run around and protect the human from getting sick. And so then, that's stage one. And then the next stage we add HIV, which then comes and like grabs the immune system so that the immune system has trouble protecting the human. And in that way, we show it. And then they throw the ball again, and obviously the human gets sick way more times. And then in that way we can say, look, HIV is not what makes you sick, but it makes it so your immune system can't protect you. And a lot of kids don't know that. And so it's a great way to show them that, and they remember because they played a game, and it works great, and I love it. That's another game. In that one, it was called HIV Limbo. So if they touch the pole, they contact HIV or are at risk for HIV. And so you start out like this, and you say, this is if you don't have a partner. And then you lower it, and you say, this is a partner the same age as you. Lower it again. This is a partner 5 years older than you. Lower it so that no one can get under it. This is a partner 10 years older than you. Because it's like way more dangerous to have an older partner as far as HIV goes. And then that's at a graduation. They were very excited. They love getting certificates. So that was at my second graduation. We've done two rounds. And this one they got lucky because it was at a school party too. All right, and then the biggest part of my job, the part that matters the most just in general and also to me, is community integration. So I live in the village. Like, I'm in it. I live with a host family. So these are my host family members here. My host sister on the far left, my host mom. In the middle picture, that's my host Gogo, who's not always around, but when she is, that's her. And my little sister, Rebutile, who I love very dearly. She's 8 years old. And then that on the right is Surprise, my host brother, and one of his goats. They have many of them. So that's the house where I live. The picture on the top left is my host family's house. And then in the middle, you can't see it too well, but that's inside their house. I go there pretty much every day to watch TV with them. We watch soap operas together, which are wonderful. And we also watch WWE on the weekends because there's no soap operas. So. And then on the far right top is the cooking house. So they do some of their cooking inside the house, but a lot of it is over the fire. So they wouldn't want to do it in the house because of the smoke. So they have a little cooking house there. And that's where they do like the traditional meals like the maize meal porridge, which is called pap, or bohobe and sapeti. They also can do sweet potatoes, beets, chicken. Those are like the 4 staples. And then the bottom left is behind my host family's house. There's a cornfield. Right now, there's nothing there, but they're about to plant in January, and that was taken, I think, in around April or May. And so they harvest that, they grind it up, they turn it in, they give it to someone to turn into maize meal, and then they're able to eat that for the rest of the year. And then the middle bottom one is of the JoJo. So there's no running water at my house. I have electricity, which is great. I don't know how I'd survive without it. But there is no running water, so most of the time we get our water from these JoJos, which are just big water tanks. And then the bottom right is of my little host brother in front of the kraal, which is where all the cows and goats sleep. They all go out during the day, and then there's this great time in the afternoon where all of the cows and all of the goats from all of the houses in the village are all coming back at the same time, and no one's directing them. They just know where they live. So they all come back through, and all the little baby goats are like screaming because they know their moms are coming back. It's great. So this is my room. This is where I live. These pictures were not taken at its cleanest moment, but that's all right. So the top, that's like my kitchen area. So I've got my little oven. It's a stove/oven. It's great. And then I got my little mini fridge. Got my kettle behind the oven there. Got my dishwashing bucket thing. underneath the table. And then my principal is the best and knew I needed shelving, so she gave me that huge cabinet. She literally took it from the school office, was like, you need this, put it on the back of her truck and drove it to my house. And I was like, awesome, thanks. I really did need that. And then that's my bed. Most of my furniture is supplied by the Department of Education, so the only things I had to buy were the stove and the fridge and then little utensils and things like that. And then that's the outside of my house. So my host family's house is just there, but they have like a separate room where I live, and then when my host grandma's around, she also lives in a bedroom behind mine. Yeah, and then that used to be used as my host mom's kitchen where she cooked, because she cooks like these wonderful things called fat cakes and brings them to the secondary school every day. But then she just had a baby, so she hasn't been doing that recently. But yeah, so that's what she does every day, and that's what she used to use it for. These are just some more pictures from around my village. So the top left one is of what we call a spaza, which is a small shop. And so this particular small shop is my favorite because they show movies on that little screen that you can see there. So all the kids come and just hang out there, and like they'll buy little bags of chips for like R1, and then they just sit there and watch movies, and it's really fun. I go there and I get these huge things called zapatos, which are the best. They basically hollow out a loaf of bread and then put like chips, and by chips I mean French fries, sorry, French fries, polony and cheese and egg, and it's so good. So I go there and get that quite frequently. They also have small things like bread, soda, yeah, just like small tiny little things. And then the bottom left there is what I call a taxi. I don't know what Americans would call it, but it's called taxi. And so that's like the main way that people get around. So you ride on one of those and they go from certain place to certain place. Usually if you catch them at the first place, you have to wait until it fills all the way up before it will leave and go to the next place, which can be a long time, unfortunately. I was actually just on my way to the airport. I had to wait for about an hour and a half for one to fill up, and it was hot. It's summer there right now. It was not a pleasant experience. And then the middle picture, that's the inside of a taxi. And then on the bottom right, that was taken by my host sister. It's me and my village. Another big part of community integration is attending events. So I have not really been to that many funerals because I don't really want to go, but I have been to a lot of weddings and a lot of school events. So these are some pictures from a wedding I went to in a different Peace Corps volunteers village. So as you can see, the bride and the groom are sitting on thrones up there, which is awesome, and I love it. Weddings in South Africa are a 2-day event, or at least in Sepedi culture, are a 2-day event. So the first day, they go to the bride's parents' house, and on the second day, they go to the groom's parents' house. And at each house, they host this huge event where there's just tons of people. Like if you know there's a wedding, you can come. So like, it's a lot of people. And so they feed everyone. They cook these huge vats of pap and this huge vats of chicken, and like they just feed everyone. And they have like, I don't know, hundreds of 2 liters of soda so that everyone can drink soda, and yeah, it's a good time. That in the bottom there, bottom middle, that's an example of like the nicer wedding food, and you usually only get that if you go into the tent, which is where like the actual like close friends and family go. So there's chicken, butternut squash, potato salad, beets, cabbage, and rice. And that's pretty standard. It's very delicious. And then the bottom right is from, they like leave the wedding mid-wedding and go and take photos and then come back. And this is a video, but I need to exit out. They do this like literally the whole day. Yeah, so dancing is just like a huge thing. Everyone dances. And I love it because Americans have a lot of hang-ups about dancing. We do not dance in front of people unless like the lights are way down, you know? South Africans, they just dance, like they don't care, and I love it. It's great. Like everyone at the wedding is just dancing the whole time. I'm sure the bride by the end is just like dead, but that's what they do the whole time. Oh, another video. So before I start this one, so because the wedding is like the whole day and there's just a ton of people there, it's not as formal as our weddings. Like there's no time during the wedding when everyone is quiet and watching something. Like everyone is just talking and eating and milling around the whole time. So this is an example of when there is nothing explicitly going on with the bride and groom. So this is like kind of a down moment. And so a lot of the time, the family will hire groups from around to come and like give entertainment. So that's this group. Yeah, so it's quite fun. These guys actually tried to get me to come and dance with them, but I was like, no, not gonna happen. I think my next one's a video too. Let me check. So these ones are from these are a school event. So this was my school was part of a contest with a local bread company where we turned in like bread bags and then they gave us a prize at the end and they said, oh, you won, so like arrange an event and we'll come and celebrate with you. It turned out that we got like 5th place out of 6 schools, but we still had a party and it was great. So this is just literally a transition period from one group performing to another. So this will give you a sense of what South African parties are like. Yeah, so you can see the bread truck up there. They had speakers, very exciting. But yeah, those are all my little kids trying to dance. And so this next one is a performance at that same event, and it's a traditional dance called the Scorch. And it's the little, I think they're all grade 3 and grade 4 in this dance. They got real tired. Yeah, that's actually my little host sister in the middle there. But and then yeah, you can see on the side, on the right top there, those were 2 of my grade 7s, and they were emceeing the whole event. They were not particularly happy about it, but they did it, so. Grade 7. Yeah. All right, so a little bit about rural Sepedi culture. So I already talked a little about how it's very communal, and that you can see that in the wedding too, like the way that everyone can come, no matter whether you were explicitly invited or not, and you're gonna get fed. Like everyone, yeah, it's just very communal. When you're in the village and you see someone you have to greet, like not greeting is just extremely rude, even if you don't really know them. So I'm going to say it if you can follow it, but you say the same thing every time. So the first person says dumelan, and the next person says ache, and the next person says lekai, next person says rehona, and then they say rehona. And that literally translates to like hello, hello. And literally it means where are you? I am here. I am here. And in practice it means like how are you? I'm good. And it's funny because even in English, like, because people will directly translate that. So instead of asking like, oh, how is your sister or how is your cat? They'll be like, oh, where is your cat? Or where is your sister? And I'm like, I mean, she's at home. I don't know. Yeah, so it's very sweet. And then, yeah, so, and then it's interesting for me as like an introverted Minnesotan, because here you can't just show up at someone's house unless you know them super well. But in my village, like people will just come and just show up at your house, and they'll just come and they'll stand in the courtyard and go, go-go, go-go, until someone comes out and answers. So sometimes my host family won't be home, and so I'll be the only one there, and I really don't want to interact with other humans. So I'll just like hide in my room, and they'll just stand there for 5 minutes, like steadily growing louder and louder, and I'm just like, no. And then sometimes I'll get called out, because it'll be my students, and so they know that I'm home. And so they'll say Coco for a couple minutes, and they'll go, Ma'am Abby! I'm like, fine, I'll come outside. Yeah, so it's a good time. And I've gotten more used to that, but at first I was just like, other humans, please stay away from me. Yeah, so then another thing about my village is that it's quite deeply religious. The Christian church is quite big there. Some people combine it with aspects of like African traditional religions, but pretty much everyone in my village would identify as Christian. And they would be very confused if I didn't. And so most of them follow the Zionist Christian Church, which they call the ZCC. And you might have seen in an earlier photo, one of my counterparts was wearing a green ribbon. And hers has a bird, sometimes it has a star here. And when women are wearing that, it shows that they're part of the ZCC. And if they're wearing that ribbon, then they have to have their head covered. So like my host mom is part of the ZCC, and so when she's like just home, she usually has her head uncovered and the badge off. But whenever she leaves the house, badge is on, headscarf is on. They also do night prayer, which I've only gone to once, and that was enough for me. But it's literally an all-night prayer. Like they go to someone's house around like 8 p.m. and they dance and they sing and they pray for the whole night up until about 7 a.m. the next morning. And it was a little intense for me, but it was a good time. And just an example of how amazing my host mom is, she knows me pretty well, and it was at her parents' house. And so she like reserved a bedroom for me. She was like, if you need to be somewhere not here, go in this bedroom. And I was like, I love you so much. And then school prayer is a huge thing. Like at that morning assembly I talked about, they pray every morning, and a lot of the time they'll read Bible verses and things. So as far as like what I've been learning in South Africa, I mean, I think I've come more around to the idea. I mean, there are things that I knew before, and now I just like know. Mm-hmm. And so there's the fact that like I am not the central part of any story, and one of the biggest parts of Peace Corps is making sure that no one sees you that way, like making sure that you are there as a voice for other people. And I think as a church and as a community and as people who want to help others, I think that's a really important lesson. Like you are not the center of the story. You are not the one who tells other people what they need. Like they tell you what they need, you connect them to those things. And I think that's the biggest one. I'm sure there are more, and I would be happy to talk about more with people individually, but yeah, so this is question time. So thank you so much for listening. If you have any other questions or things I haven't covered, now is the time. Rick in the back. Yeah.
Do you get a salary? How do you you get support? How do you get money, shall we say?
Right, no, that's a great question. So I do not technically get a salary because I'm a volunteer, but how it works is they give us a living stipend. So once a month we get enough money to cover like transport, food, a little bit for like clothes and entertainment, but it's mostly those two first things. And then rent is covered by the Department of Education. They pay my host family like a little bit of money a month. And then I have to pay my host family for electricity. So, yeah. And then at the end of my service, I get like a resettlement allowance so that when I come back to the States, I'll have a little bit of money to settle in. Yeah.
How did you get involved to begin with?
I mean, I kind of applied on a whim. I didn't really think too much about it. I was like, oh look, I could apply for Peace Corps today, and I did. And so then I got an interview, and I still was kind of like, well, I don't know if I'm going to do this, because I was mostly aiming towards Peace Corps Morocco, because that's the region that I was more interested in. But then they accepted me to Peace Corps South Africa. They only give you 3 days to think about it. And then if you haven't responded, they just take that as a no. So I only had 3 days to think about it. I thought about it. I decided that I wanted the experience. I wanted the life of a Peace Corps volunteer. And here I am 2 years later. So, yeah.
Why does South Africa want Peace Corps there?
Why?
Yeah.
So in South Africa, we have two groups of Peace Corps volunteers. We have education volunteers and health volunteers. So education volunteers are there to sort of bridge the gap between the more well-off schools and the schools that are falling behind, like the school where I work. And so why they want us there is to be like that extra resource for those schools to try to get them out of the cycle of poverty, out of the cycle of broken education system. And we can't really do that much, to be honest, but we're just an extra resource for those schools. And then the health volunteers are there working mostly through PEPFAR, which is an American program trying to combat HIV and AIDS. And so they do programs in their communities to try and educate people about how to get treatment, trying to break the stigma around HIV and AIDS, and trying to make sure that everyone gets tested, knows their status, and then gets treatment. So,
How do they feel about whites?
how do they feel about white people?
Yeah.
It really depends on where you are. And it's a big question. I mean, in my village, like me, like the people in my village accepted me more because I'm white, because they expected me to be white. Like people think of Americans as white. So like I know Peace Corps volunteers who are not white who have had trouble because people don't believe that they're American. Yeah, it's a problem. And I stand out in every situation that I'm in, so it depends on what the situation is. Yeah, it depends on the person, complicated question, but yeah, in my village, my kids really like to touch my hair. Yeah.
Can you express your Christianity?
Oh yeah, I mean my whole village is Christian, so yeah. They would be more confused, like if I was atheist, they would be like, what do you mean you don't believe in God? So in life orientation, I taught a religion class, and so we went through like all the major religions in South Africa. So like Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism, Christianity, like all of the major ones. And then at the end, I was like, oh, also there are people who don't believe in God, and they're called atheists, and they were all just like, what? And they were like, they had never even heard the word atheist before. So yeah, so it's very, very, very deeply religious in my village. So.
Thank you.
Is there fiber arts there, weaving and knitting and all that stuff?
Yes, it's not usually quite the same as it is here, because they don't really have yarn, but they'll do knitting. Like, I didn't bring it with me, but when my mom visited, they gave her one of these huge mats, which they weave with like corn, I think it's corn husks. And those are used a lot, especially by go-go's. Like when my grandmother, my go-go, is over visiting, she'll just be laying on the floor most of the time with the mat. So that's like the big one. Yeah.
Corn husker.
Yeah, I was going to ask, now, there is a standard curriculum that you follow, so you don't have to sit and try to, do lesson plans and all of that?
So I do lesson plans, yeah. There is a standard curriculum, and so they give you like more of a tracker, like what subjects you're supposed to cover in each week. And then they also try to provide schools with resources like lesson plans, and they have like workbooks that they give to the kids. So there are quite a few resources. It's just a matter of to what extent the teachers use them. Because a lot of teachers don't lesson plan. When I was shadowing, like during my first couple months there, I wasn't teaching, I was just going to other people's classes. And they tend to just go in and lecture and they'll write notes on the board because it's a more teacher-centered learning environment. It's not really very student-centered. So they'll lecture, they'll write notes on the board, the kids will copy the notes, and then they'll give them a workbook assignment, and then they'll just sit there while the kids do the workbook assignment. And that's like a 2-hour class. Yeah, so lesson plans are not as big of a thing there, but I personally do lesson plan, yeah.
Tell us more about your library project.
Okay, I'll talk about my library project all day. So the name of it is the Mpule Maflo Library, which is Sepedi for open eyes, and that name was selected by one of the teachers at my school, and she selected it because she wants the library to be a place where kids can come and like see the world. Because most of these kids, they never leave the village. Like, transport out of the village is too expensive for most of these kids to leave almost ever. So they really only know this like very small segment of the world, and they see other things on TV, but TV is not really that educational most of the time. So the library is going to be a place where the kids can come and read and like self-direct their own learning. And these kids like really want that. Like they ask me all the time, like, oh, when are we getting a library? When are we getting a library? The grade 7s are very upset because they're leaving the school and the library's not there yet. And so they're all like, ma'am, Abby, you said we were gonna get a library. But they can come back and see it another time. But yeah, they really want that. Like whenever there's a book in my school that's a nice, interesting book, it's always like loved to death so fast because they all want to read the book. So they'll all like pass it around and flip through all the pages and like fight over it. And so I'm hoping if we have more than one book, they won't have to fight over it and it'll last a little longer. So
Where are
yeah.
they coming from? Where are the books language-wise?
Oh, sure. So we're getting 2 book donations from organizations, one that's in South Africa, and so those will be Sepedi books, and then one that's in the United States, so those will be English books. And then we're also, in our grant, we had some money laid aside to buy some books. So I'm hoping that that'll work out well. So, yeah.
Hey Abby, is there education beyond 7?
Mm-hmm. So that's just the primary school where I work, but beyond that there's secondary school. So kids, yeah, so there is. They go to secondary school. A lot of kids tend to drop out around like grade 10 or 11 if they're like the kids that I have where they've fallen so far behind that they don't even speak English. Once they get to those higher grades, there's just no way, like it's not possible for them to really catch up, so. But there is, and then university, all that stuff.
What access do the older kids and adults have to world information? Like, you could say news, but just in general.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of people have TVs, so they'll get like world news from that. Radio is a big thing, they listen to the radio on their phones. People do have phones, usually they're not super fancy, at least not in my village, although I am very continuously on the taxi and I see people with nicer phones than me, so like, it's not that unusual. So I think those are the main ways, kind of the same ways that we get our news.
Is the village fairly homogeneous, or do you have like really wealthy villagers and really, really poor villagers, and what are fat cakes made of?
Great question. No, that's a good question. So it's really, yeah, so it's not super homogeneous, but so the unemployment rate in my village, like among people who actually live there, is something like 90%. Yeah, because there are no jobs in my village. Like it's in the middle of nowhere. The only places you would really work would be at the school or at one of the spazas. So most people who have jobs have left the village. So they'll send money back to their relatives who still live there. So for example, like in my host family, you may have noticed like in those pictures there was no host father, and that's because he lives in Johannesburg and he sends money back and he comes and visits like once every couple months. And that's the way it is for most people. Like most of my students live either with just one parent or with no parents, and they're raised by their grandparents or their aunts or whoever. And that's another part of the problem, is that a lot of the grandmothers don't speak English because they came up in the system, in the Bantu education system, and so then when the kids come home and have homework in English, like there's no one to help them. Yeah, so it's a big problem. But there are people in the village who are relatively wealthy, but most of them are the ones who work like at the school.
So how was it the village was founded there? Usually
Good question.
a village is founded because there's work, there's food, there's resources there.
The short answer is apartheid. I asked that question at the beginning of my service because they have this process where we're supposed to be finding out about the village. And what I've heard is that what happened was before the British settlers came, people were more like nomadic lifestyle, like they had their herds and they were just kind of living around, like they were more spread out. And then when the British settlers came, they condensed people into villages and basically like took all the land. And so like my village, the name of it is an English name because it was founded by the British settlers. Yeah. So they basically just like put people into groups. Yeah. How it went.
So it's kind of like Indian reservations.
Yes, it's a lot like Indian reservations. Yeah. No, at the beginning of our service, one of the things that we talked about was that basically the histories of South Africa and the United States are not that different. It's just that the United States like did a quote unquote better job of getting rid of the original people who were here. So like, yeah.
Source of palatable water.
So in my village, how the water system works is that there are taps in almost everyone's yard, and those taps come on maybe every couple weeks. So when the taps are on, everyone connects a hose to them and fills up as many buckets as they can and hopes that that water lasts them until the next time the taps turn on. So sometimes, like one time the tap didn't turn on for a whole like month and a half, and we were in pretty dire straits by the end of that, so yeah.
Who turns on the tap?
I don't know. I wish I knew. I would call them.
The wizard turns on.
Did you have to overcome any food problems because of the change of your diet?
I mean, there were some problems. Yeah. Most volunteers have some issues with that, especially during training because I wasn't cooking my own food. So, and the standards of like cleanliness are different. So yeah, so there were some issues, but now I cook mostly my own food and I'm back more on a regular. I'm okay now. I'm all right now.
We're all glad
We're all good. Yeah.
Any chances of re-enlisting or what? September's, it's 9 months away.
Yeah.
So wondering, have you thought about your next step, your next journey?
Well, I mean, I have like obsessively thought about it, yes. But there's nothing like for sure yet. My current plan is to come back to Minnesota for a year and apply for grad school while I'm here.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
You're gonna pick up with, in your grad school with your, South African experience.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Are you gonna pick up with your grad school, your South African experience? What are you thinking, Abby? Go ahead, Vern, ask him. What are you thinking?
What am I thinking? I mean, I think, so Peace Corps does one of two things from what I've heard. It either makes you super into international development, makes that what you want to do, or it kind of makes you not want to do that at all. I'm somewhere in the middle, but like I'm tending more towards the I don't really want to do that at all. But that's partially because going into it, my goals were not really to do international development. I want to do immigration law. So I'm planning to get an immigration law degree and a master's in public policy. So, yeah.
Go ahead.
Go for it.
Do my best.
What about the food? I
miss it, Brad.
Oh, yeah, we didn't get the fat cakes.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot to answer about the fat
I was
cakes.
gonna raise my hand again, but I was too tired.
So fat cakes are probably my favorite. They're just literally just balls of dough. So like flour, water, and like some sugar, I'm assuming. And then they just take them and they put them in oil and they fry them and then you eat them. And they're so good. Like my host moms are the best, I must say. They're very delicious and very bad for you. I'm kind of glad she's not making them anymore because like I was eating them way too much. Yeah. Oh, and then some other food. I mean, pap is a huge thing. Like it's so it's literally just like corn flour and water and salt. I actually made some last night, and you boil the water, you put the corn flour in, and then you just stir, and then let it sit for a while until it's nice and stiff. And then they take it and they like roll it in their fingers, and then they scoop sauce and pop it in. Yeah, no one eats with utensils, you just all use your hands. Which, the first week we were there, we were all at like a training site. And there were some South Africans there, but it was like mostly Americans. And we were all eating pap, but we were eating it with a fork. And then we looked over at the South Africans, and they were all looking at us like, what are you doing? So, but we all got used to it. We all eat with our hands now.
How long are you home for?
I am home just until the beginning of January, so.
Okay, will
Yep.
we see you again
Yes.
here? All
I
right.
think so.
So if you have more questions or more ideas what Abby should do with her life,
Yes, I need ideas.
this is not your only opportunity. All right, how about if we just close by a little prayer of gratitude and, yeah, God has a lot to teach us, and He's going to teach us things through people like Abby, who see the world through different eyes. We're so grateful. We're so grateful. So let me pray. Thank you, God, that your great big world is in your hands, and that you lavish such beautiful traditions and people all over your world, and you care so deeply about details like libraries and learning and food and laughter and dancing. It really enlarges our understanding of who you are as we meet more and more of your people. But we also remember, God, that there's just legacies of wrong. There's legacies of injustice that just separate us, and that we have a really hard time dismantling and understanding. So we ask for your grace and your peace and your hope and your love to flow through each one of us as we open ourselves up to your world and your work in all the ways, God, that you are represented in your place, your world. Thank you for Abby. Thank you that she's here. Thank you for Christmas. Help us celebrate you well. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, everyone.